Welcome to the Israel Insider Weekly Podcast, where we talk about the news in Israel with Ron Cantor, president of Shelanu TV and Israel Regional Director for God TV. I'm Lisa Hutchison. Thanks for joining us today. Ron, this week, of course, it was a very important high holy day in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, and you put out a special call to prayer. And I'm sure many of the listeners would like to know how that went and what was the update from that effort.
Yeah, it was really amazing. I remember when I was a young minister, let's go back to 1993, I had this dream that one day we would have 1 million people praying for Israel at the same time.
Wow.
And I kind of forgot about it. I dream big. When I dream big. Like Elon and I were praying for something yesterday, driving down the road, and I'm not even joking. We were asking the Lord for a sign. Speak to us, Lord. And we looked up, and there was this massive sign that said "Dream Big." Now it was for an upcoming casino that they're building in. And so we don't want to take the analogy too far, but I do like to dream big. And so, this year, we started the High Holy Season with Rosh Hashanah, or what is biblically called Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets. We did a teaching on the importance of looking forward, not backward, but forward to that last great seventh trumpet that will announce the kingdom of Yeshua coming to earth. But there is another trumpet blown, and it's on the last day of the 10 days of awe, Yom Kippur. It's not in the Bible, doesn't tell us to blow the shofar, but traditionally it became part of the holiday because that's how you would know that it was okay to eat. You were fasting for 24 hours, and you don't know when the fast is over because there are no clocks. There's no iPads, there's no iWatches or Apple Watches or any, you had the sand and the sun. And so the priest would give the signal, and then the shofar would be blown. In ancient Jerusalem, there was actually on the Temple Mount, there was a place called, was the place for the blowing of the shofar. And that was kind of how they made announcements. That was email. That was instant messaging. And different sounds meant different things. So the beginning of a Sabbath, the end of the Sabbath. So the trumpet is blown, and we know where exactly that was. We found an actual piece of an artifact written on it, the place of the blowing of the shofar, and it's right underneath, where it would have been. It was destroyed, of course, 2,000 years ago. That's in the Israel Museum. So as we entered into, we're getting close to Yom Kippur, I thought, why not ask believers all over the world? We have this great big shofar called God TV that we're able to reach both on the broadcast channel and through our Facebook pages, millions of people. And we asked believers to, who aren't Jewish, to join with the Jewish people, because this was a day that Jewish people all over the world in unity are fasting. And what a great time for Christians to express their love and hunger to see Jewish people find the Messiah by joining in with that fast. So we put out that call, and we have no way of knowing how many responded because there was no click here, participate by doing this. It was, just do it. And we did a broadcast that was aired on Yom Kippur yesterday, depending on when you're listening to this, on Thursday, September 16th. We began on the 15th in the evening. We did a program with Asher Intrader, Troy Brewer, and Eitan Chishkov. The first two of them are apostolic leaders in Israel. And Troy is a Gentile pastor in Texas who gives a ton of money to Israel, to bless Israel. And we had a great time praying. It was anointed. It was rich. I don't always feel the presence of God when I do ministry. I wish I did, but this was a rich time. And you can go back and watch that on, it's on the Ron Cantor Facebook page. It's also on God TV. Go watch that and take a half hour and pray. It's on the broadcast channel as well. So what my dream is. So how was it? Was successful? I think it was very successful. Here's something funny. There is a woman, I think she's a woman from somewhere in Europe that started sending me some very aggressive emails criticizing my ministry, the Bible version I use. They were pretty strong. Just so everyone's clear, that doesn't bother me. I bless everyone. I'm not worried about that. I'm telling you that for a reason. She emailed me after she watched the prayer broadcast, and she said, "Everything I've written you in the past, just forget it. I love you. I love what you're doing. I'm behind you 100%." Now, I may get a different email next week. I don't know, but I thanked her. So
that's awesome.
I really feel God's hand is on this. What I'm hoping next year, Lisa, is that we can be more proactive. You're a member of our team, the Messiah's Mandate team. You know that I get inspired very quickly, sometimes not with a lot of time to do the preparation. Right. And we did this. We got our team, the God TV team, and everybody was amazing. Just so the folks know, we have our team of 4 people, but then there's the broadcast team at God TV, which is 8 or 9 people, and then we have a digital team at God TV and an email team. We have all these different teams. They love Jesus, they love the Lord, they love Israel, they love the gospel, and everybody stepped up. Everybody played their role. Yeah. And a lot of those people, nobody's going to know their names, but Yeshua knows their names, and they're great servants. So it was really successful, and I'm hoping next year that we'll start a lot earlier, like months earlier, and really do something where we can gather momentum. And I believe over the coming years, we will get 1 million people, 1 million born-again believers fasting on Yom Kippur, Gentile believers from the nations fasting with the Jewish people on Yom Kippur. And that is going to be how Israel's eyes are going to be open. And let me just say this one last thing, and we'll move on to some of the news. We woke up in Texas yesterday morning. It's not how I normally spend Yom Kippur. We normally spend it in Israel with the people of Israel, which is a beautiful thing. You might want to read this Sunday's Sunday story at roncantor.com. We do this thing called 52 Stories About My Life in Israel. And this week I wrote about Yom Kippur, what it's like to be in Israel for Yom Kippur. It's amazing. But strangely, I was in Texas because Troy asked me to minister to his congregation. And we aired it on the God TV page, Troy's page, our page, about Yom Kippur. And then we woke up yesterday morning in Texas. We actually flew home fasting, which is really weird, but we had a great prayer in the car. But before we even got in the car, we had an hour and a half to the airport. We sat down with Troy and Ilana and I did, outside. And I'm not joking, there were donkeys involved. There were chickens involved. I have the video. And there were a couple dogs and a cat named Tom Cruise. I kid you not. And they all gathered. We all gathered hilarious. For prayer. It was like the virgin birth, the nativity scene. And but we had
the Garden of Eden, all the animals. Yeah, that's awesome.
I am again. I have the video. Troy lives on a ranch, and he's got these 2 donkeys that they just walk around all day. And whenever he's outside, they want to hang out because they think he's going to feed them. And then the chickens come, and it's crazy. A little bit different than my, normal MO in Tel Aviv. But it was great because their ranch, it really has the peace of God. We loved being there. But we were up early before 7 and we were praying together. And Troy prayed that that Jewish people at the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, yesterday morning, as they were praying, and they would be there throughout the day fast. They don't even drink water. And they asked, and they're praying for forgiveness for the nation. He prayed that their eyes would be open. And I felt that was a prophetic prayer because I believe there's going to be Jews at the Wailing Wall. There's a couple scriptures, and just pardon me, I know a lot of people come to this podcast for news about Israel, but this is future news. The Bible talks about a day when the Jewish people will recognize that Yeshua is the one that was crucified, the crucified Messiah, and they will mourn for him like one mourns for only son. That's Zechariah 12:10. And that's repeated in Revelation 1:7. A lot of people don't make the connection, but John says, he says, every eye is going to, the Son of Man is going to come in the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. Speaking of the Jewish people. And we know the Jewish people did not crucify Jesus. It was the Romans, but our leaders did hand him over and demand that he be crucified. So it talks about them, and it says it says all the tribes of the land will mourn. Now, most Bibles say all the peoples of the nations, but in the Greek, it says tribes of the land. And what a lot of folks don't know, of course, we know the tribes of Israel, but when we say the land, and if I'm in Israel right now and somebody asks me, hey, Ron, are you in Israel? Can we meet? They're not going to say, Ata b'Israel, are you in Israel? They will say, Ata ba'aretz, are you in the land? That's how we talk.
Yeah.
And so I believe that John is prophetically, there's a double meaning there, a double prophetic meaning. It does mean the nations of the world will mourn as they recognize that the one coming in the clouds is Jesus, but specifically it means the 12 tribes of Israel in the land of Israel will mourn as they see Jesus, because that's what Zechariah 12:10 says. And that's repeated again in Matthew 24. It says they will see this, and by the way, I'm driving to North Carolina. We got back to Richmond, and now I'm going to be with my great friend Scott Volk this weekend for a conference he's doing, and so I'm driving right now. So I can't read the scripture. That would be wrong on many levels. But I can paraphrase it. It says that they will see the sign of the Son of Man in the sky, and they will mourn. The nations will mourn. So this is a pretty powerful thing. So as Tori's praying that there's going to be this revelation, I believe it happens primarily at the Western Wall. Why? Well, we know that when Jesus comes back, the Jews are being persecuted. We also know that he comes to the Mount of Olives, which you can see from, if you just walk outside the gate there, or even from the steps that lead down to the Western Wall, you can see very clearly the Mount of Olives. And that's where he's coming back to. So he's going to be very visible from Jerusalem, because he's going to be in the sky. Just to get our geography and our atmospheric understanding right, he will be in the sky. His sign will be in the sky. I even have to wonder prophetically, because it seems to say, Lisa, that sign of him, I never hear any preachers preach about this. They just talk about the second coming. But it says first they see his sign in the sky. Matthew, I think it's 30 and 31. How long is that sign going to be there? If I had to guess, 10 days. I have a theory that it will be between Rosh Hashanah or Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur. Those what we call the 10 days of awe, the 10 days of repentance, the 10 days of judgment, and that there will be lots of repenting during that time as they recognize that Yeshua is the Messiah. So. And let me give one other scripture, Matthew 23, verse 37 through 39. This is after Jesus has just severely rebuked the Pharisees and the scribes, called the 7 woes. Woe unto you. He calls them blind guides, twice the sons of hells. It's very graphic and very, very blunt. But then he begins to break down. Almost, you sense he's weeping. Or he's tearing up, and he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I have longed to gather you, as a hen gathers her chicks, but you were not willing. See, your house has left you desolate." Speaking of the coming judgment of the Temple Mount, or the temple, that would be 40 years later. And he says, "You will not see me again until you say Baruch haba b'shem Adonai." In other words, you're not going to see me again until you recognize that I am the Messiah. So you welcome me. See those words, blessed is you, comes in the name of the Lord, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Those words in Hebrew are a welcome. Like if I come to your house on a Shabbat dinner, first thing you're going to say to me in Jerusalem is Baruch haba, welcome. And that's what Jesus is saying. Until you say this, and I believe they're going to be crying out. I believe they're going to be crying out from the Wailing Wall, from the Western Wall, from the Temple Mount Plaza. Jewish people are going to be crying out Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, and as they see his sign in the sky.
Wow.
Just like Joseph, who saved the whole world, yet he lost his brothers. He finally reveals himself to his brothers, and his brothers receive him. That's what's going to happen at the end of the age. Whew. Okay, so that's all I got to say about that. A little bit longer than I expected, but I hope it blessed folks.
That was really good preaching and teaching.
Have you heard of Shelanu TV? It's the only 24/7 Hebrew language gospel channel, and we are reaching tens of thousands of Israelis. Learn more at shelanu.now.com. That's shelanu.now.com.
Also this week, earlier in the week, before the holy days, Israel Prime Minister Naftali Bennett was in Egypt, and he had a historic meeting. It's the first time the two heads of state, Egypt and Israel, have met in 10 years. And they, just kind of made some basic inroads. I think you could describe it as, in their relationship. But would you share with the listeners a little bit more about their meeting? And then just, Egypt and Israel have a pretty long history. So if you could share with us some about that and the context.
Yeah. So, Egypt, obviously, we used to be slaves in Egypt. Passover is about us being, now the folks who are primarily Arabic, who occupy Egypt today, probably did not occupy it back in the days of Israel and Egypt and slaves and Moses and all that. They were probably darker skinned Africans. Nevertheless, Egypt is still geographically there, and there's certainly prophetic significance to that nation. A lot is written about Egypt in the Bible. So 42 years ago, we established peace with Egypt. It's because they kept losing wars against us. There was a war of independence in 1948. 5 Arab nations attacked us. They lost. They were shocked. They could not believe that this ragtag bunch of Jews with a few handguns and 3 airplanes defeated 5 Arab armies. Of course, it was the hand of God. Then there was 1956. They tried to annihilate us again. And we just took the whole Sinai Desert, which is a pretty cool place. You've got the Sharm el-Sheikh resort area there. And there's a great movie. Oh, goodness. What is the name of it? But it's about how these CIA agents established a fake scuba diving. Some of the best scuba diving in the world is in the Red Sea there. And they established a fake scuba diving place in order to get refugees into Israel. It was a station where they would bring them through. I think they were Ethiopian refugees. Very, very cool movie. But that's in the Sinai Desert, and you've got the Taba area, which is close to Eilat. So it's a gorgeous area. Of course, the pyramids are in the Sinai Desert. A lot of Israelis go into Sinai to vacation now. There was a time we didn't, where it was very unsafe. It's a little bit safer now. I've never been there. My wife has actually been there a couple of times. So, but they get tired of losing wars. And then in 1967, we went even further. We were on our way to Cairo when they called a ceasefire. We were over the Suez Canal. We were on the other side of the Suez Canal. So Gamal Nasser, who was the president of Egypt at the time, we just couldn't understand it. In fact, the 6-day war, we were outnumbered by tanks, by everything. And we just realized if we didn't attack first, we didn't want war. We wanted peace. But we said, well, if war is what you want, and they had put their troops on our border, and they kicked out the UN peacekeeping mission, which was once called the greatest peacekeeping mission in the history of the world. They kicked them out, and they said, okay, we're leaving. So it's easy to keep peace when there's no conflict. But the minute there was conflict, they bolted. And we knew, the rain clouds were on the horizon. So we attacked first. We won decisively, miraculously in 6 days. We expanded our territory. Again, if anybody wants to call Israel an imperialist nation, we only expand territory when people attack us.
Mm-hmm.
So I call that just being smart. So in fact, during the 6-Day War, we asked Jordan not to attack us. We said, if you do not attack us, we won't attack you. They said, no way, we're attacking you. We don't like you and we want more land. They attacked us. We took back Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, the Old City, and the entire West Bank.
Wow.
So that's how we ended up with the quote unquote Palestinian lands. It's because they kept attacking us. So with that in mind, Nasser, I believe Gamal Nasser dies, and he is replaced with Sadat, Anwar Sadat, who he was the vice president, and he was very smart fellow, and he decided that he wanted peace with Israel. He just not that he loved Israel so much, but he just got tired of getting defeated. And so he comes, he even came to Jerusalem, but first he went to Camp David, the Camp David Accords with President Carter and with Menachem Begin. It's very interesting that some of the major peace initiatives that have happened between Israel and Arabs are with right-wing governments, not left-wing governments. So here is Menachem Begin, the leader of Likud at the time, and they make peace. Now, for all of his efforts, he was shot and assassinated, Anwar Sadat, in Egypt, I believe, and because he made peace with Israel. So he paid a heavy price.
Yeah.
And then but the peace held. I don't think anybody expected it to. The peace held. It was pretty amazing. And then in the Arab Spring, was it 2012? I think so. The ill-named, ridiculously named Arab Spring. Everybody, we're gonna have peace in the Middle East. All these. Turns out that the people waiting to take charge of Libya, of Egypt, of Syria are Islamic radicals, and certainly Iraq with ISIS. So in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, as they took down Mubarak, the dictator, he was elected, if you want to call it that word, the president of Egypt, but he was a dictator. And but I hate to say it, but in Egypt you kind of needed a dictator because that there's so much violence and unrest. And so when they had elections after that, it was the Muslim Brotherhood that won. Now, most people didn't realize what they were getting in for, and then people began to protest. And then a fellow by the name of you can help me with his first name, I know it's General Sisi, now President Sisi.
Right. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi.
Yeah, there we go. We'll call him just El-Sisi.
There you go.
Not Sissy. Do not call him a sissy, because he did a very brave thing.
That's right.
He led a military coup against the Muslim Brotherhood, and he took back power. It was a military takeover, and they immediately installed a prime minister and declared new elections. But they first outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood, rightly so, terrorist organization, and they put Morsi, the president, in jail and put him on trial. And he was actually going to be executed, but they overturned that. And then he died while he was in prison. Sisi was then asked to run, El-Sisi was asked to run for president. Now he is the president of Egypt, has been since 2013. He seems to be a very pragmatic, practical man. I don't think he loves Jews, but I think he respects Israel. And there's no reason to not have peace with Israel and to not have good relations. So Bennett, this is a big win for Bennett, because anything he can do, when you come in the shadow of Benjamin Netanyahu, the longest serving prime minister in the history of Israel, who is just criticizing your every move, just waiting for you to make a misstep, anything you can do to look presidential or prime ministerial, if you call it that, it is a win for him. So going to the White House, meeting with Biden, that was a win. Going to Egypt to meet with another head of state, that's a win for him.
Yeah.
And by all accounts, they had a good meeting.
Yeah.
So
one other interesting thing that happened this week, just on the heels of this, just again, I think really putting the spotlight on Prime Minister Bennett is that he was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world.
Yeah.
And which that in itself is, an accomplishment. But to me, the even more stunning thing was who nominated him, which was
Right.
the Arab leader in Israel, Mansour Abbas, as part of his coalition. And so, not that they're enemies, but they are, they have very different ideologies and
Yeah.
faiths and beliefs, and that, that Bennett's.
I think behind closed door, they're friends.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the Israeli politicians who can't stand each other in public, they know how to get along in private. That, by the way, that's part of being a politician.
Yeah.
Is knowing how to disagree and yet make progress with people with whom you disagree.
Yeah.
That's the art of politics. And that's a pretty cool thing that here is a guy who leads the Israeli version of the Muslim Brotherhood, nominating the prime minister, and a lot of people for the, Times, most influential people. And he makes a list. Do you know what number he was?
I don't.
I'm curious, if he was 100 or if he was 5.
Yeah.
but it's a pretty amazing thing. And I have felt prophetically, as I felt very strongly that the Lord had shown me that Bibi, this is back a year ago now, that he was going to be removed as prime minister. And then that did happen. And then people were very upset at the fact that Bennett was going to form a government with a Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that God's hand was in that. People have to understand that when it comes to politics and governments, it's not all about having every single person agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
It's about taking care of human beings. The purpose of government is not to be a religious institution. It is to take care of the people in a country. It's to look out after their welfare. And like it or not, 20% of Israel are Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
And a godly government must have Arab representation. So here's a guy, and what a great opportunity is for him, Mansour Abbas, to say, all right, I don't have to be a radical. I don't have to be a lunatic Islamic fanatic. I can actually be a upstanding politician and work with Jewish people. I think it's a beautiful picture. It's one of the first times, this is what we want with the Palestinian Authority, and what we've never gotten it. And so here you've got a Jewish prime minister working with an Islamic head of a party, the Ram party, and it's working. We're now we're in September, and this 3.5 months into this, or 3 months into this new government that, many said was going to fall within a month. It's got a 1 vote majority, a razor thin majority, and it's still going.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Prime Minister Bennett, he's also, I'm sure we'll be filling everybody in at the end of the month, but he's supposed to be addressing the United Nations for the first time at the end of this month, September 27th. Yeah. So we'll keep everybody posted on that.
That's another big deal, by the way. That everybody knows that green marble background. Every year in September, heads of nations come to New York City, and they go to the United Nations right there on the East River, overlooking the East River. And everybody knows the green marble background where they all give speeches, whether it was Ahmadinejad from Iran, Netanyahu from Israel. And so to get that photo up, that's a really big deal for him. It just, again, it's another thing that makes him look not like a little boy, who's in his 40s, with Bibi looking over his shoulder, at every instance, it's just another opportunity to say, I am the Prime Minister of Israel.
If you're enjoying the Israel Insider podcast, make sure to sign up for the Israel Insider Daily Mail with news from the Holy Land at join.theisraelinsider.com. That's join.theisraelinsider.com.
For our final story this week, I'd like to share about the Jews in Bahrain. Bahrain is one of the nations that entered into the Abraham Accords last year, and they're a Gulf state nation. And basically, I didn't realize this until I started, researching for this article, that the Jews in Bahrain, they have basically been underground, hidden in their faith since Israel became a nation. When in one of our stories, you talk about how, there's the Palestinians and that issue of when Israel became a nation in 1947, 48, they were, the Palestinians, went out from Israel, but at the same time, Jews were forced out from Arab nations. And that also impacted the Jews living in Bahrain. Many of them fled, but a handful, like I think just a few dozen, stayed. And they have now, for the first time this holy season, have been able to worship again in public. And so would you share a little bit more just on that for us?
Sure. That's pretty amazing. It's very similar in Syria, where they weren't underground, but a very tiny Jewish community stayed behind. In Iraq, Iran, all these nations have pockets of Jews. The fact that they had just a few dozen, that's one of the smaller communities in the Middle East. But a lot of people don't recognize the persecution that these Jews came under after Israel became a nation. They've heard about the 600,000 to 800,000 Palestinians that fled Israel in wake of Israel's independence. Now, a lot of people have been wrongly told that the reason they left was because Israel drove them out. And I can prove to you right now that that's not true. And I can prove it to you because there were 600,000 Arabs that stayed in Israel. If Israel was going to ethnically cleanse the land, they had the power, they had the means, they were winning the war, they could have driven every Arab out. It would not have been hard, because what happens is, and this is what happened, I'll tell you what happened, is there are several reasons the Arabs fled. The main reason that they fled is because the leaders of the Arab nations, and I'm not making this up, we have recordings, radio recordings of heads of states of Arab nations urging the Arabs to flee. And they were basically saying, flee Israel, we're going to attack, and then you'll come back and you'll have your home and your Jewish neighbor's home. And so hundreds of thousands of Arabs heeded that call. That's probably 80% that left because of that. Then you've got some that fled because they began to hear the rumors of the Jews winning the war. So I'll give you an instance. There's one story. It's called I'm butchering the name. It's an Arab town. I think it's Yair Disan, something like that. Anyways, and it was a massacre. Now, it wasn't a massacre, and yet it was. It wasn't one of the highlights in Jewish history. But what happened is that the Haganah, or rather the Irgun, there was two major fighting forces in Israel before independence. One was the more traditional Haganah that became the Israeli Defense Forces, and then there was the Menachem Begin-led Irgun. So they go into this Arab town, and they're thinking that they're going to be able to win. Again, they're battling for their survival. So it was town against town. So they go into this town, and they expect that the Arabs are not going to resist, and they resist fiercely. Did not have a lot of weapons, but they had bombs. And the only way they could themselves not get killed is they started blowing up after home. And the residents of Deir Yassin, I think that's how you say it, Deir Yassin, they ended up fleeing to the next town. And then they told the stories of what happened. Well, as this is Middle Eastern culture, what was 2 becomes an 8, what was an 8 finally 10 and a half. And so what was, by all accounts, a defeat for the Arabs, and very difficult one. Homes were blown up, people died, this folklore stories of the savage Jews cutting open pregnant women, raping women, and obviously none of this ever happened. But as the story spread, like in a game of telephone, from town to town, the Arab villagers became terrified. And so, thousands of them fled Israel. And so, others fled just because they were scared of the war. Who wants to be in the middle of a war when you can go over to Syria or to Jordan, or even just to the West Bank and feel safe? Now, once Israel won the war, they were like, you guys, we told you to stay. In the Declaration of Independence, David Ben-Gurion says to the Arabs that are still in Israel, please stay in Israel. Please be a part of building this nation. We guarantee you freedoms. Now, I'm sure many didn't believe that. Turned out to be true. And we've got, 1.5 million Arab citizens of Israel who have freedoms, all the freedoms that Jews have, and they have passports. They can travel all over the world as Israelis, not as Israeli Arabs, not as Palestinians, as full Israelis. So people don't talk about that. Or rather, they talk only about that, and then we get blamed. But they don't realize that about 600,000 Jews had to flee Morocco, Bahrain, Yemen, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, because they came under Tunisia, Algeria. They came under persecution because the Arabs were angry that Israel became a nation. So the fact that now we're celebrating now 1 year since the Abraham Accords, pretty amazing thing. And we are now exchanging ambassadors with Bahrain. And, we started this whole thing to talk about the fact that they've opened up their embassy in Jerusalem, or rather I'm sure in Tel Aviv, one day in Jerusalem. And the new ambassador has presented his credentials to the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog.
Amazing times that we are living in so many ways. So many ways. Well, thank you, Ron. I think that'll probably wrap it up for this episode, and safe travels out there on the road. And if
sorry about the sound quality. It's not my usual awesome microphone. I could have set it up in the car, but that would have been too much and dangerous.
Yeah. We're glad that you didn't, and just keep driving safe. And for all our listeners, if you can just be sure to share this podcast with a friend and give it a review so others can find it, and sign up for the email by finding us on Facebook, the Israel Insider on Facebook. And thanks again for joining us. We will see you next week.